Hi there, my name is Patricia Maricordero Rizarri, and I'm a master's student in the Environment and Natural Resources graduate program at The Ohio State University. Specifically, I belong to the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center, where I focus on soil carbon dynamics in different horticultural settings. So first of all, I want to thank you for stopping by this presentation, which I've titled Soil Organic Carbon, a Farmer's Most Faithful Ally. So let's get started. I've divided the talk into 5 different areas. First, what is soil organic carbon? How is it distributed? How is it beneficial? And why is it a faithful ally for farmers? And how can we conserve it? Now, when we talk about soil organic carbon, we'll be referring to it as SOC along the presentation. So what is SOC? It is defined as the main component of soil organic matter, which we'll also abbreviate as SOC. And carbon encompasses the majority of SOM mass. Around 58% of soil organic matter is soil organic carbon. Now, specifically, soil organic matter is the organic fraction of the soil that includes plants, animal, and microbial residues that are in different stages of decomposition. Also, we have the biomass of soil organisms and substances produced by plant roots and other soil organisms. It's also an indicator of soil quality, health, and environmental sustainability. It's defined as the driving force for biological activity and the primary source of energy and nutrients for many soil organisms. And humus, it's its most significant component. Around 60 to 80% of the total organic soil mass is humus, as we can see in Figure 1. Now, there are different fractions of soil organic carbon. We have the passive, the slow, and the active. And they were going to be differentiated by the turnover rate. Now, the turnover rate, it's basically the time that it takes for a specific substance to change. So the turnover rate for the passive fraction is hundreds to thousands of years. It consists of very stable minerals protected in clay humus complexes. Around 60 to 90% of total organic matter is in this fraction. It's responsible for the cation water holding capacity, which we'll discuss later on, and it's the least affected by management practices because it's the fraction that's found in the lowest part of the soil profile. Now, the slow fraction, the turnover rate, is decades. It consists of the finest particles of particulate, the finest fractions of particulate organic matter, and they're high in lignin and other chemically resistant components. They're the source of mineralizable nitrogen and other nutrients, and tillage may cause some disturbances. Now, we're going a little bit upwards in the soil profile, which is why tillage may cause disturbances. And lastly, we have the active and the labile fraction. The turnover rate is days to years, and here we can find easily decomposable materials such as POM, which is particulate organic matter, polysaccharides, and other non-humic substances. It's the main food source for soil microbes because it has a high nitrogen content. It provides most of the beneficial effects of the structural stability, but it's the least percentage of the fraction in the organic matter, around to 10 to 20%. And this one is the one that's mostly affected by the management practices because most of it is found in the top soil, in the first 30 to 50 centimeters of the soil profile. Now, organic matter cycling is basically the breakdown and the decomposition of organic matter. So as we discussed previously, we start with the fresh residues, which is the active organic matter, which is the active and labile fraction. And then over time, we then reach the point of stable organic matter. Now, all of these processes are done thanks to soil microbial activity. And then as part of their natural metabolic processes, then they emit CO2 into the atmosphere. So this basically sums up the 3 fractions of organic matter. We start with active organic matter, and then we reach the stable organic matter. So how is COC distributed? Now, first we need to talk about decomposition. So let's define it. Decay process in an ecosystem can be thought of as a continuum beginning with fresh plant matter and leading to the formation of soil organic matter. So basically the diagram that we saw previously. And it involves the physical and chemical processes that reduce litter to CO2, water, and mineral nutrients. Now, this is the key process in the nutrient cycling of terrestrial ecosystems. Now, if we talk about decomposition, we have to talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, these two reactions are fundamental in the decomposition processes. As we know, plants undergo photosynthesis. They take in CO2, mix it with water, and then they form glucose and oxygen. If we go the other direction, we take the oxygen and the glucose plus energy, then we will have a CO2 and water. Now, photosynthesis, plants do it, so this is the process by which plants actually grow and develop. So this is the beginning of that plant litter that the microbes are going to need to then undergo their cellular respiration. Now, biomolecules. This is very important to remember that all living things that are on the earth, they have carbon in their chemical composition. Now, carbon is basically the backbone of life. So everything that's alive has carbon. And it's precisely because of these biomolecules that statement is true. So we have lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates. Now, as we can see in these figures, carbon is everywhere. Carbon is the structure. It's the backbone of these molecules. So this is where the carbon is coming from into the system. And when we talk about the system, we're talking about the soil. So this is where it's coming from. It's coming from our bodies, from the chemical structure of which carbon is the main protagonist. So all of these molecules, they have in common carbon. Now, the rate of decomposition of these, of the plants and of all this, these residues, it's going to differ. Some will be more rapid, some will be more slow. So we start off with sugar, starches, and simple protein. So the simpler the molecule is, the easier it will be broken down by the microbes. Now, as we go further along this list, the chemical structure starts to become more complex. We've got crude proteins, hemicellulose, cellulose, fats, waxes, and lignins and phenolic compounds. So the more complex the structure is, then the more time it will take to be decomposed. Carbon balance in the agroecosystem. Now, the rate at which SOM increases or decreases is going to be determined by two main things: the carbon inputs and the carbon outputs. Now, the carbon inputs are what we call gains into the system, and they come from plant residues and from applied organic materials. And the carbon outputs are what we call the losses, and they're due to cellular respiration, plant removal, and erosion. So in our farms, if we want to achieve sustainable farm management, then we need to increase the additions of carbon to the soil and decrease the losses. So the balance between these two is actually what's going to determine the rate at which SOM increases or decreases. So whatever we take from the soil, we have to put back into it, because we have to replenish the soil. Whatever we take must be put back. So imagine when you're going out to the gym, you're doing a workout, and then when you come home, you don't eat anything. You don't drink anything. You're probably not going to feel well. Your body's not going to function properly. So the same thing happens with the soil. If a lot of work is being done and you don't put any of that back in, then the soil microbes, which are all of the ones responsible for the soil organic matter decomposition, they're going to feel dizzy. They're not going to be able to function. So we need to also provide this carbon for the microbes to be able to do their processes. So it's the same thing. What we put in is what's going to come out, and the other way as well. Now, this is in figure 3, we can see visually the different types of carbon inputs and the outputs, which we'll mention also later on. But we have mulch, compost, amendments, photosynthesis, plant and animal residues. Now, these carbon inputs are entering the system, and then they're creating these soil organic carbon stocks or pools or reservoirs. And then the carbon outputs would be cellular respiration, leaching, erosion, and plant removal. Factors that influence SOC stocks. So we have temperature, moisture, and land use. Of course, there are several others, but I'm going to be focusing on these ones. So here we have the Holdridge life zone diagram. And it's a perfect fit because this is a system that was developed by Holdridge in 1967, in which he classifies the different world life zones based on humidity provinces, annual precipitation, potential evaporation rate, latitudinal regions, and altitudinal belts. So all of this information, he put it together, and it sort of explains why that type of environment is the way it is. It's not just because, it's because all of the conditions are actually creating the perfect atmosphere for that environment to develop. If we think about Ohio, Ohio is pretty much around here in the cool temperate, the steep, and the moist forest. So based on all of that information, put it into a diagram, and then we have an idea in the specific environment what the conditions are going to be. And then that will also help us to determine how the carbon is going to be, how much is going to be in there. And this is the work that was done by Post in 1982. So it seems a bit complex at the beginning, but really what I want to point out is that carbon tends to accumulate in certain areas. So here in the bottom, we see, remember that it's the humidity provinces. So we have the desert on one end and we have the rainforest in the other. So as the humidity increases, we can say that carbon will increase also as well. Also with the precipitation, not too little, but not too much, just the perfect amount for carbon to accumulate accordingly. And also here in the potential evapotranspiration ratio, closer to the bottom. So we see that here, where it's cooler, carbon tends to accumulate more than in hot areas. Now, this is because in cool and temperate climates, microbes function, they're a little bit slower. So then that carbon doesn't get decomposed as fast as it does where it's warmer and humid. So that's why carbon tends to accumulate in these types of zones. Now this is the diagram that we saw previously, but just in another form, in a bar graph. And we can see that the highest carbon content is in the tundra, followed by the boreal forest wet, and then by the tropical woodland and savanna. So why grasslands and woodlands? Now, this is for another reason. It's because of the root system. Now, the type of vegetation that occurs in this particular area, they're very deep. So the roots really penetrate really further down along the soil profile. So then there's also some processes going on down there. So the soil, the carbon that's root derived in that area, it's protected, what we mentioned before about the clay humics complexes. So that's why also there's a lot of carbon content in this, because the roots really go along that profile, and then they're generating that root derived COC. And then if we can also notice here, the tropical desert brush, it has the lowest amount of carbon because of that. It's dry and there's not really a lot of humidity, so there are not the favorable conditions for that microbes to be functioning properly. And also there's not a lot of plant litter being produced. Now, also we need to talk about soil order and land usage. Now we know that the soil orders, we have them because there are different conditions which promote the formation of different types of soils. So if we think about here, molly soils, they're the ones that have the highest amount of carbon, because particularly this is something that is characteristic of these soils, the molic epipattern, which is high organic matter. But we also have some alphisols, and then the lowest are the aridosols. So it makes sense that in arid climates, there's not a lot of carbon, so aridosols, which are the soils characteristic of that area, they won't have that much carbon as well. And here we have the yellow grass, which represent the grasslands, so the highest carbon content. And then we have the virgin forest, which is also has a high carbon content as well, because it's a system that's not very much disturbed. So then the carbon is able to stay there. There's not a lot of outputs versus, let's say, a cropland. So how is SAOC beneficial? So there are 6 main benefits according to the University of Minnesota Extension. So we have soil structure, water management, nutrient cycling and retention, cation exchange capacity, microbial diversity and resiliency, and crop yield, which is the most important one for farmers. Now, I've developed an acronym, STRU-1UKAMEDI. Now, I know it's a little weird, but I'm hopeful that someday it will catch on. But if there's something I want you to remember from this presentation, it's particularly this. Why is SOC beneficial? Structure, water, nutrients, cation exchange capacity, microbes, and yield. And we'll get into each one right now. Soil structure. Plant exudates and microbial byproducts. Now, these act like sort of glue, and they help keep the soil particles together. And this helps form and stabilize aggregates. Now, when we have stable aggregates, then we have better aeration and friability. Now, we know that around 25% of the soil is actually air. So it's a very important portion of the soil. Now, when we have better air, we also have better infiltration, because we're creating all of these pores and channels that we'll discuss in the next slide. So it's also a home for macro and microfauna. Water management. Now, SOM has the capacity to receive and retain water. It acts sort of like a sponge in the soil. So it helps create and maintain these channels that we mentioned earlier, and then water is able to move easily and with ease throughout the soil profile, and then we have better drainage. And when we have better drainage, then we prevent runoff and erosion. And also the residues that we leave on the surface, they also help retain that water. Nutrient cycling and retention. Now, active organic matter is full of fresh and accessible nutrients, and this is because of the microbes. The microbes are the one that they break down and they decompose until we reach that soil organic matter. And then these nutrients, they will be consumed by the soil organisms, but they will also release it into the soil solution. Now, this is particularly important for crop production because plants will uptake the nutrients that are in the soil solution. So if no one is actually releasing those nutrients into the soil solution, then the plants will not be able to take the nutrients because it has to be in the water for the plants to use. So it's either free for uptake by plants and other organisms, or they are lost by leaching and volatilization. Cation exchange capacity. So basically, CEC, which is how we abbreviate it, is the capacity of the soil to retain a specific set of nutrients, which are the cations, which we have calcium, magnesium, sodium, ammonium, hydrogen, and potassium. So around 20 to 80% of the CEC is provided by SOM in mineral soils. But now this is not only dependent on the soil organic matter, but also on the texture of the soil. It's very important. Now, and the general idea is that the higher organic matter content we have in the soil, the higher the CEC will be, and then the more likely the soil will retain these nutrients. Now, CEC also exchanges hydrogen ions because it is a cation. So CEC also plays a role in determining the pH of the soil solution. Now, all of the nutrients that are being uptaken by plants, if those nutrients are available in the CEC exchange sites, then there's going to be resupplying the soil solution. So the plant will always have nutrients for its use. So when we have a higher CEC, then this allows the soil pH to be more resistant to rapid and large changes. And this actually protects nutrient availability and plant health in the soil. Microbial diversity and resiliency. A steady supply of organic matter into the soil will support an active and diverse community of soil microbes. Now, this is fundamental because the soil microbes are the ones that drive the nutrient cycle, and then they influence the availability of nutrients to the plant. So we need that microbial diversity because we need soils to be resilient because of the wide range of ever-changing conditions that we're facing. So if we only have one specific set of microbes, then they will be doing the same thing. And if something threatens them, if something takes them out of the way, then who will drive the nutrient cycle? So that's why we need diversity. We need fungi, nematodes, bacteria, and we need insects. We need all of these species working together to sustain the ecology of the soil system. So not only we have that, but also SOM is important because it actually creates and maintains their habitat because it is their food source, so they need that. And then why is it a faithful ally for farmers? So this is why we're going to reveal the meaning of our title. So why is SOC a faithful ally for farmers? Crop yield. That's the answer. SOM content is intricately interlinked with other physical, chemical, and biological properties and processes. So basically, every aspect of the soil, every reaction, every process is influenced and it can be improved with higher SOM content. It's a critical indicator of soil health through positive impact on soil properties and processes. Now, when we talk about soil health, we're actually referring to the biology of the system, to the life that soils are able to sustain, whether it's the microbial, whether it's the crop. And we also have to put ourselves into that equation because we build on top of the soil. Communities and cities are built upon this. And not only that, but healthy soils means healthy crops, healthy harvests, and then we're going to be healthy as well. So it's all interconnected. And then this differentiates from soil quality because soil quality is referring more to the function that we give to the soil. Because if we have a civil engineer and we have an agronomist, then they're going to be using the soil for two completely different purposes. Now, we set a specific purpose for the soil, but the soil itself is going to tell us if it's adequate for the function that we want it. So agronomic productivity, we've spoken a lot about that SOM acts like a sponge and it helps retain water and nutrients. So when we think about plants, we know that plants need sunlight, they need water, and they need a substrate. So we have the water, we have the substrate is the soil, and then all of the nutrients will be in there. So crop yield, agronomic productivity, this is the key of SOM. Now, because it provides water and other type of nutrients, SOM content can partially replace the use of chemical fertilizers and supplemental irrigation, but while also restoring the environment. Especially if we have some nutrient limiting conditions, we can also, and we don't have the availability or the resources to use chemical fertilizer, then if we increase our SOM content, then with time, the nutrient content will increase as well. So it also affects crop yield through its role in enhancing and sustaining soil quality and soil health that we discussed previously. And also, if we think about soils of the tropics or soils that are highly weathered, then the SOM can actually affect the nutrient supply by increasing the cation exchange capacity and also increasing nutrients. So basically, SOM content increases water and nutrients. And because plants need this and they use it to grow, then this is directly related to crop yield. Now we've reached the last portion of our talk. How can we conserve SOC? So there are different types of carbon stabilization. So in more simple terms, we have physical, biological, chemical, and ecological stabilization. So every portion of the processes and reactions, carbon can either become decomposed or it can become stable. So if you think about soil structure, for example, the clay and humus complexes that we spoke about before, if carbon is interlinked within the soil aggregate, then it will be more difficult for microbes to access it, whether if it's, let's say, on the surface of that aggregate. So this is a type of physical stabilization. But also, we're talking about microbes, we're talking about the biology aspect. So if the soil microorganisms can get to it, then the biological stabilization, we can sort of see that as well. And also the chemical, because this is what the microbes are doing, just enhancing all these chemical reactions. And then if we think about this system entirely, then we're talking about then the ecological carbon stabilization, because we're also a part of that system. If we do practices in the soil that are going to increase the carbon inputs, then we're actually playing along with this carbon flow also as well. In more specific terms, we have selective preservation, which is closely related to what I spoke about the carbon being in specific places where microbes can't really get to it. And then spatial inaccessibility, which also refers to that as well. In the selective preservation, I forgot to mention that this is more inclining towards the recalcitrant compounds. Now, when we talk about the rate of decomposition, there are some compounds that take a longer time to decompose, and this is the selective preservation. Spatial inaccessibility is the one that's linked to the physical carbon stabilization. And then we have surface and metal ion interactions, because they're also going to be affecting the rate of this decomposition. So there are different ways to look at this, but it's important that we think about it as a system, as different parts that are working together. Now, to build organic matter, soil microbes are the SOM builders. But for them to grow, we need to provide them food. They need to have a strong house, and we need to have freedom from physical and chemical disturbances. So healthy soils, as the image says, are supported by efficient microbes. If we want healthy soils, we need to think about the soil microbes, because without them, the organic matter cycling, that will not happen. The nutrient cycles will not happen either. So healthy soils, we need to have that healthy life in the soil. Now, here we have the different types of carbon inputs that we spoke about previously: crop residue, less plowing, compost and manure, crop rotation, and cover crops. So when we talk about these carbon inputs, these gains into the system, we're actually helping build organic matter. So this is why they're so important to consider and to implement in our farm so that we can increase the SOM content. So to build organic matter, we need to maintain that stable carbon flow. We need to keep that carbon coming into the system because we need to enhance soil carbon sequestration. Now, this is the process in which plants remove CO2 from the atmosphere. They store it in their biomass, they make it available for microbial breakdown through plant litter, and then the microbes convert it into the soil organic matter. This diagram basically sums up what we've discussed, the carbon inputs, and then the processes that happen for that carbon from the plants to then enter the soil system and stay there, because we want the carbon to stay in the soil system. So to destroy organic matter, we just completely interrupt the carbon flow. And with this, we'll be altering the soil carbon sequestration as well. And this happens when we plow excessively, when we excessively remove plants, and this then causes soil erosion either by wind or water. So this also relates to something we mentioned before, that whatever we take from the soil, we need to put back. But when we're harvesting, we're actually taking all of those nutrients, we're taking them out of the system because we're going to consume those products to gain those nutrients ourselves. But then we cannot deprive the soil from these nutrients, so we need to replenish them. And this can be done with increasing soil organic matter. So we've reached the end of the talk. So we're just going to review some basic points that I want you guys to remember. So soil organic carbon, what is it? It's the main component of soil organic matter, which is the organic fraction of the soil that includes plant, animal, and microbial residues in different stages of decomposition. How is it distributed? Most of it, it's near the soil surface, around 30 centimeters. It's higher in cool and moist regions and higher in grasslands and verdant forests. How is it beneficial? Through one committee, the acronym that hopefully you will catch on: structure, water, nutrients, cations, microbes, and yield. And because it helps improve crop yield, it's a faithful ally for farmers because it increases water and nutrient availability. Now, this can help farmers actually save money by reducing the inputs, but it also promotes environmental sustainability. And how can we conserve it? We have to encourage soil carbon stabilization and sequestration. These are my references. And this is officially the end of my presentation. Wholeheartedly, I want to thank you for stopping by, for your attention. I'm very grateful to be able to share this information. Now, life is a continuous exchange of information. So just as I've provided information to you, feel free to exchange information with me. If you have any questions, if you want to make any suggestions, or if you actually want to correct something that I said, please feel free to email me. I'm always willing to learn, especially from my mistakes. So once again, thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.